Today, we take a look back at some of the best players to play under Coach Bruce Pearl at Auburn and set a lineup with those very players. Welcome into today's edition of the Barn Hoops Podcast. I am your host, Jacob Hillman, and we're going to take a look back in the history books and over the last 10 or so years after coming off the second Final Four in Auburn history at the best players to come through and play for head coach Bruce Pearl. Obviously, coming off the second Final Four, there's some pretty good players on that team, and how do they factor in to this lineup that we're going to talk about? We're actually going to set two lineups today, and I'll let you understand why that is when we get to it. But this is something that has been on my mind a little bit for the past few weeks, and kind of wondering, how would you set a lineup with only players that have played for Coach Bruce Pearl at Auburn, and what would that lineup look like? Obviously, there's been several NBA draft picks in the front court. You've had a lot of dynamic scorers in the back court as well for Coach Pearl and this program over the last 11 or so years. And I figured I'd put it pen to paper and figure out exactly who I think should be starting and who's going to be left off the list. There's some pretty good honorable mentions that we'll talk about later on as well that got just left off of the 2D that we're going to set. Obviously, something else that made this list a little difficult is the positionless basketball that Coach Pearl kind of uses. Obviously, different guys can play different positions. Johni Broome being one that we're going to talk about today. He's played the 4 and the 5 in his career at Auburn, and we'll talk about exactly where he slides in later on in this episode. But let's get right into it. I want you to be obviously this is going to be a very this is not an objective list at all. This is the most subjective list that I think I could come up with, because there's just ways to go about this. And the first lineup I'm going to talk about that I have set is a legacy lineup. So these are the guys that had the best careers at Auburn and went on to accomplish great things as well. So a little bit of mix of great college careers as well as some of the top tier NBA talent that has come through Auburn. And we'll start it off with the point guard. And the point guard that led Auburn to its first ever Final Four, that was Jared Harper, who played from 2016 to 2019. I give him the start over Tahaad Pettiford, who obviously was not a starter this past year for the Tigers, but he is going to be that this upcoming year. And he is just obviously a guy that grew throughout his career, Harper is. And I think there were some frustrations with Harper early in his career, but obviously it ultimately turned into the greatest run that Auburn basketball has seen in March and late February. In his Auburn career, he was great. I mean, just even though it took some growing, he averaged 13.5 points per game, including 15.3 in his senior campaign. He averaged just under 5 assists per game throughout his career. He averaged 5.8 in his career. His 3-point percentage rose to 37% in his senior year. But again, you go back and you look at that run in March, and obviously Bryce Brown, Chuma Okeke, Austin Wiley, D'Angelo Purifoy, they were great players, and not to mention Samir Dowdy and others. But Jared Harper was the point guard. He's point guard one. That's one of the most important positions on the floor, and that's why he takes my starting spot here with Tahaad Pettiford backing him up. Pettiford, obviously, in his first year at Auburn this past year, he was great in that 6-man role that he filled. He played 22.9 minutes per game compared to Harper his senior year. He played 32.9 minutes per game. So a little bit of a minutes differential there. But Pettiford, he averaged 11.6 points per game. So he nearly matched Harper's point average there. A little bit lower on the assist total with 3 assists per game, but Pettiford was a little bit more efficient, 42.1% from the field. He was just a great facilitator and distributor of the basketball. Moving on to the shooting guard and the 2 position. This is a pretty obvious one. The most prolific 3-point shooter in Auburn basketball history, Bryce Brown. He's right next to Jared Harper. It's hard to break those two guys up when you're talking about legacies when it comes to the Bruce Pearl era. Both those guys kind of grew up together throughout their careers. And obviously it ultimately turned into that amazing Final Four run in 2019 that will never be forgotten. And Brown, just, you look at his numbers throughout his career, and it faltered off. He was pretty good his freshman year, and then that 2016 to 17 year, he dipped off a hair, but then his junior and senior years, he averaged right at 16 points per game both seasons and just let the threes fly both years. I mean, you just go back and look at some of those games. There's a Kentucky game at home his senior year that Auburn actually lost, where he led a 17-point comeback before Auburn ultimately fell. And then you look at some of the threes that he made in the NCAA tournament, and especially with Jared Harper. You look at the SEC tournament championship against Tennessee when Harper passed up a wide open layup to get it to the corner for Bryce Brown. That was the kind of shooter that Bryce Brown was, and why he lands in the starting spot on this legacy list with Samir Doughty, another guy that this backcourt and even the wing is 2019 heavy. Samir Doughty. And the reason I'm going to give the edge to Samir Doughty over KT Harrell here on the legacy list is because Doughty made the first team All-SEC honor in 2020. That's a forgotten year, guys, because of the way it got cut short because of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's very unfortunate we didn't get to see Samir Doughty and that team play in the 2020 NCAA tournament. The Tigers probably would have been a top. Obviously, the SEC tournament hadn't happened. I don't know how much that would have impacted things, but Auburn was right there coming off a big win over Tennessee. Could have been a top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. But I like Doughty right there as the backup too. And he can plug and play kind of wherever. He can play. Again, this is more the positionless basketball. He was on the floor at times with Jared Harper and Bryce Brown. So that's where things get tricky with the positions here and how you figure it out. But I absolutely think that Doughty is worthy of a spot on this list. And he just, again, his senior year when Harper and Brown and Chuma Okeke had left, he goes off for 16.7 points per game. And he was a defensive menace as well. If you go back to that Elite Eight game against Kentucky in the 2019 Final Four run, Tyler Hero was one of the best scorers for the Wildcats. And he's one of the tops. He's a great scorer in the NBA. I'm calling him one of the top scorers in the NBA, but he is a NBA. He's stuck there. Like, he is very good in the NBA, but he cannot get anything going because of Samir Doughty's defense. And that's a little bit of the twist there. Harper, Pettiford, Brown's defense is pretty good, but I think Doughty's took it to the next level. And again, like I said, he could fill it up as well with his scoring ability, and that's why he lands as my backup 2 guard. Starting small forward. This is where things start to get really difficult, I think. And this is the entire front court. It's difficult decisions. And I'm also playing with the positions a little bit here. I think you could argue that Chuma Okeke is a power forward and a 4, but for the purposes of this exercise, I'm sticking him at the 3 and the starting small forward, just because of his 2 SEC titles, the 1 Final Four that he won alongside Jared Harper and Bryce Brown, and the fact that he was Auburn's first NBA lottery pick. He was the first rounder for Auburn in a long time, and he really set the stage for the NBA talent that ultimately came to Auburn later in that decade. And we'll get to some of those guys later on. But, he doesn't have the most flashy stats in his Auburn career. 7.5 points per game his freshman year, 5.8 rebounds per game. And then he stepped it up a little bit, scoring 12 points per game with 6.8 rebounds per game. He also averaged north of 1 block and 1 steal per game his sophomore campaign. But again, you look at how Auburn got to that Final Four, and he obviously didn't play in that Kentucky game or the Final Four game due to that torn ACL. But that North Carolina game against the Tar Heels, a blue blood, a team with a lot of NBA talent, and Chuma Okeke was the best player on the floor. I just think that those 3 guys, that's why they're starting right here in the legacy lineup, because they set the stage for the greatness that was to come for Auburn basketball. My backup 3 is Isaac Okoro. He only played 1 season for Auburn, but he, again, backed up kind of or really solidified what people began to think about Auburn and the pro talent with Chuma Okeke with his first-round selection, with Okoro going 5th in the NBA draft after he averaged 12.9 points per game, as well as 4.4 rebounds and 2 assists per game in his freshman season at Auburn. And again, his defense was the key. He missed several games in that freshman season with an injury, I think, to his hamstring, but he was still a great player and has found consistency in the NBA. He's played on the Cleveland Cavaliers, just recently traded to the Chicago Bulls. So this is just again, further proof of what Coach Pearl built with this program and how talented some of these guys were, because skipping ahead a little bit to these honorable mentions, Mustafa Heron, you want to talk about legacy? What he did for Auburn was really lay the foundation for guys to come in and be talented. He led the way for scoring. He led Auburn in scoring 2 consecutive seasons in 2017 to 18, or 2016 to 17 and 2017 to 18. And Heron very well could have landed on this list, averaging 16.4 points per game in 2017 to 18, just ahead of Bryce Brown and Jared Harper. He also grabbed 5.3 rebounds per game. He shot 43.9% from the floor. Heron was a very, very good player, and he took home an SEC title before transferring home to St. John's to be closer to his mother. And it really was, Heron was that first guy. I was like, okay, this is something that we haven't seen at Auburn in quite some time, since guys like Marquise Daniels helping lead Auburn to its first SEC title since 1999, to its first NCAA tournament appearance since 2003. Heron was one of the main reasons for that and why he is worthy of an honorable mention. Moving on to the big men, the power forward, Jabari Smith. You don't have to say much about him, just his raw talent, his raw ability. And while this is the legacy list, I can't leave him off of the starting role because of the fact that he did win an SEC title. He did go 3rd overall in the NBA draft. And you just look at his numbers from that year at Auburn. 16.9 points per game, 7.4 rebounds per game, 2 assists, 1 block, 1.1 steals, 42% from 3. Jabari was special. That was because you look back at Chuma, you look back at Isaac, you look at Mustafa, you look at Jared and Bryce, great players, but coming into Auburn, they still had to develop. Jabari Smith could have gone to the NBA out of high school, and he would have been drafted there. And that's what was so cool about him. And he was really that first. He might have been the first McDonald's All-American that Auburn had picked up in a while. Someone fact-checked me on that. But that's why Jabari lands on the legacy list as well as a starter, just because, again, he's the highest draft pick for Auburn in a long time, and he did win an SEC title. So he continued a lot of what that 2019 run began. And obviously that the COVID year got cut off short. We don't know what could have happened later in March in the postseason and that season. And then the 20 to 21 season, there's a postseason ban. Nothing really happened. And Jabari Smith helped lead the way, bouncing back from that. All right. And then the center. Well, first, the backup power forward. I'm going with Jalen Williams because he not retired. He left Auburn as the winningest player in Auburn basketball history. And part of that's due to 5th years and COVID and whatever. But Jalen Williams was still a great player for Auburn and honestly kept Auburn. I feel like he was kind of your anchor, kind of your glue guy. And he was so important to several Auburn teams that won championships. Obviously, he was a freshman that 2019 to 20 season. And when Isaac Okoro got hurt, Williams was the one that stepped up and really made a presence of himself for a few games. And then that really turned into a lot of minutes the following 4 years for Jalen Williams, and ultimately averaging 12.4 points per game his final senior campaign. And again, like I said, the winningest Auburn basketball player in history until Dylan Cardwell surpassed that number this past year. And I just think that Jalen Williams also grew so much throughout his career. Again, winning 2 SEC titles in 21 to 22, and then that SEC tournament title in 2024 when the Tigers defeated Florida. He is worthy of a spot on this list. And then to the center position. This is probably the toughest position to pick here. But again, why we do 2 lists, legacy versus the talent list, so to say. I put Johni Broome over Walker Kessler. And The reason why is simply because Johni was here for 3 years and he went to a Final Four. He won 2 SEC titles, and just his numbers really are impressive from the last few years. His first year at Auburn, 14.2 points per game. His second year, 16.5 points per game. And his third and final year, 18.6 points per game. And that's a consistent theme across his numbers. Johni continued to grow. He found the three-point shot eventually in his career. And while it was still a little inconsistent, it was a threat. And that made him that much more dangerous. It made the team that much more dangerous. And it's why he why he was drafted to the NBA by the Philadelphia 76ers just a few weeks ago. So he's my starting center with Walker Kessler behind him. You could start Walker Kessler and it wouldn't make me mad. And that's why we're going to get into the next list of my lineup. If let's say all the teams came together and said, all right, we're going to play our best players from the last decade, this is who we're going to run. Well, for me, a few changes in the backcourt. With the point guard position, I'm probably starting Tahaad Pettiford over Jared Harper. I think what Tahaad did last year off the bench is so impressive. And we're going to get to see that really grow this upcoming year in his sophomore campaign. And I just think that Pettiford is so talented. He didn't go through the growing pains that Jared Harper did. And part of that is due to situation. Jared Harper had to come in and play on a much worse team, whereas Tahaad Pettiford was playing on a team that was highly rated and highly ranked and had high expectations, even if he were not on the team. But I do think Tahaad Pettiford has that extra edge over Jared Harper. I also think Pettiford is going to be an NBA. He's going to be a first-round NBA draft pick next year if he continues what he did in his freshman year. At the shooting guard, Bryce Brown is still going to be the starter, but what I'm going to do is switch KT Harrell into the backup spot for Samir Doughty. KT Harrell was the 2015 SEC scoring champion. So Coach Bruce Pearl's first year, everyone remembers that LSU game and that heroic shot that Harrell hit in the quarterfinals, but he was good all year long. And he was a guy that really, again, we talk about laying the foundation. It took a few years after Harrell. So, it's not like he hit that shot and then boom, Auburn was good, but it's something that you continue to look back at. And I know you fans, I do myself, remember that like it was yesterday and just think back to it and how far we've come. But I think KT Harrell is one of the more special players that have come through the program. It's just unfortunate he played when he did based off the circumstances. So, and then moving on to the front court. This is where things get really interesting. Again, this is setting a lineup for if we were playing a month-long tournament against the rest of the SEC and all the SEC teams got to set their lineup from the last 10 years, and it's the most talented lineup. Well, in this case, I'm going to slide Jabari Smith up to the 3. And I think that the reason for that is because of his outside shooting ability. We know he can play defense. We know he can post guys up. We know he can rebound. So he's a perfect wing player, in my opinion. And that sets things up for Isaac Okoro to come off the bench for him and play stout defense. That's a big key here in the front court as well, is the defensive ability of some of these backups. But Okoro, again, he's a guy that he's been in the NBA for 5 years now. That's hard to believe. So he's one of the more talented players that have played for Coach Pearl over the last several years. Now, again, power forward, another position change. And this is to get Walker Kessler in the lineup. Johni Broome is going to be my 4 here in the kind of all right, I got to win a game. I'm going to him. Johni Broome, again, we just talked about him and what he's done over the last 3 years for Auburn. Special player. Backing him up is Chuma Okeke. Chuma was the 3 in the legacy lineup, sliding him down to the 4 to make room for Isaac Okoro at the 3. Again, this is the kind of thing that you have in college basketball, positionless basketball, and it's something that these players have been used to for years, and a lot of these guys have played multiple different positions when they were at Auburn. So I like Broome and Okeke at that 4. It bumps Jalen Williams off the list, but again, I think his longevity is what made Jalen Williams what he was and such a special Auburn legend. And then moving on to the center, Walker Kessler, of course. What a freaking player he was. And he could have been the SEC Player of the Year if it weren't for Oscar Tshiebwe in 2022. And he's probably going to win an SEC defensive or NBA defensive player of the year before his career is said and done, in my opinion, at least. But you just look at his numbers. He put up triple doubles in his one season at Auburn after transferring from UNC. But 11.4 points per game, 4.6 blocks per game, 8.1 rebounds per game. He averaged over a steal per game, 60% from the floor. He's just the perfect center for you. He's not gonna shoot from the outside, but he's gonna be a great defensive wall, and he is an offensive threat as well. And that leads me to my backup center, Austin Wiley. He could have fit on the legacy lineup as well, but again, just it's hard to fit guys in when you have so many talented front court players that Auburn has had since Bruce Pearl became the head coach. So I like Austin Wiley just because of him being on that Final Four team. And he was the first recruit really that Auburn landed, and he thought, okay, this is a big deal. And it wasn't the talent that, Jabari Smith came in with, but he came in at 17 years old, graduated high school a semester early, and he was worth a lot of that hype. And he really was a big time player for that Final Four squad going into Minneapolis that year. So comparing the lineups again, the legacy lineup, Harper, Brown, Okeke, Smith, Broome, Pettiford, Dowdy, Okoro, Williams, and Kessler coming off the bench. And then got to win this game. Game 7 of the finals, Final Four game, whatever you want to call it. My lineup would be Pettiford, Brown, Smith, Broome, Kessler, with Harper, KT Harrell, Okoro, Okeke, and Wiley coming off the bench. And that's, again, several guys I left off this list and haven't mentioned yet, and that's where we're going to get into these honorable mentions for who you could talk about. At the point guard position, J'Von McCormick. I know that there was some people became frustrated with him at times in that 2019 to 20 season, but he really carried Auburn in several games that year. You look at some of those overtime games against Arkansas and LSU, he was so important. You look back at the Final Four run in 2019, and if it weren't for J'Von McCormick, Auburn does not make it past New Mexico State, doesn't even get to face Kansas in the round of 32. So J'Von McCormick's a name that should not go unnoticed when talking about point guards under Bruce Pearl. Sharife Cooper is another name that has not been mentioned today. And obviously the reasons he only played 12 games, I think, that it's hard to justify putting Cooper on a team just because of the circumstances, similar to KT Harrell, Mustafa Heron. He was on a team that was on a postseason ban, and he was just trying to figure things out. Wasn't playing in front of fans. There's no one in the arenas, and he had some injury issues, some eligibility issues. It never worked out for Sharife. If things had worked out differently, he might have been the number one guy on this list for the point guard position if he had maybe come back for another year, played with Jabari Smith and Walker Kessler. But nonetheless, he deserves an honorable mention just because of the talent that he possessed. Denver Jones at the shooting guard position. Obviously, he was a part of that Final Four squad this past year, and I just think that his defensive ability, his three-point ability lived up to the hype that was billed when he transferred in from Florida International, and he deserves a mention there. At the small forward, another Final Four participant this past year, Chad Baker-Mazara. He was the second leading scorer these past 2 years for Auburn, I believe. And again, Auburn's not in the Final Four without him this past year, believe it or not. And obviously, you can look back at that Yale game in 2024 and say, well, Auburn might make the Final Four without him that year. I don't know if Auburn's in the position they're in without Chad Baker-Mazara. He was the third leading scorer in that 23 to 24 season behind Johni, Broome, Jalen Williams. But he averaged over 10 points per game both seasons he played for Auburn. And I just think that Baker-Mazara is one of the more talented guys that have played for Auburn over the last 10 years. At the power forward, another guy that played with Sharife Cooper, JT Thor. He's hanging around in the NBA as well. His numbers just didn't stack up when he was at Auburn. He was a great rebounder for the Tigers, but it didn't amount to much, obviously. Just that season was just not a great one. And what was he, the sixth leading scorer on that team? He was tied with Jamal Johnson in scoring. So while he was really talented, it just, like I said, there's not much substance there to justify him being on the lineup. But again, he's in the NBA, and that's something that's very important for this program, for this staff to really be able to go out and recruit different guys. Another guy like this, specifically legacy, Anthony McLemore. What a player he was for that 2017 to 18 season. His injury against South Carolina and Columbia completely changed the course of that season. Auburn went and made the first NCAA tournament it had made since 2003, and that was great. And folks remember that as a thing to celebrate, as it should have been. But I think that's a second weekend team if you have Anthony McLemore rather than just getting past the College of Charleston and getting the doors blown off by Clemson. So, again, I think Anthony McLemore deserves a mention here, and that's why. Center position, kind of mentioned everyone we can mention. I think Dylan Cardwell, he's right there. His offensive ability didn't match the guys like Broome, Kessler, and Wiley, so he's not on their level, but his defensive ability was obviously at times he was the best in the nation these last 2 years, and he is the winningest Auburn basketball player in history. So I'll give him that love right there. So that's my all Bruce Pearl lineup. 2 lineups, legacy lineup and a talent lineup of, all right, if I got to win one game, if I'm going to the Final Four and I'm able to bring whoever I want from these Bruce Pearl coach teams, these are the guys that I'm bringing. Let me know who you think I left off in the comments. Let me know who you think someone, just adjust the lineup as you want to. Give me your all Bruce Pearl lineup. Again, remember these positions are tough to work with some of this positionless basketball that we've seen under Coach Bruce Pearl. But I do think that a lot of these names are the ones that should be there. And you could start one guy or the other, and I wouldn't disagree. So moving on to some current news and what we learned the other day with a press conference in Birmingham. Auburn will have its first exhibition in October on the 15th against Oklahoma State in Birmingham at Boutwell Auditorium. It's a small venue, I think about 4,000 seats. So a very intimate venue. If you're in Birmingham, I encourage you to try and get some tickets. Ballininboutwell.com. You can find tickets there. That's a great Wednesday night activity right before the season gets started. If you're between home football games, so that's between the Georgia football game, the Missouri football game, that's a great way to spend your Wednesday night and get a preview of what's to come. That's going to be the first look at Auburn in Nike uniforms. This is a part of a Nike exhibition series. Also, this is a part of a deal that Alabama will be playing Florida State in Boutwell Auditorium, not the same night, but just, again, a series trying to build the basketball hype in the state of Alabama. Not that it needs a ton because, you've got 3 Final Fours in the last 6 years across the 2 programs, Auburn having 2. But, again, it's really cool to see these events start to take shape, see teams like Florida State and Oklahoma State willing to come down and play against the Tigers and the Crimson Tide in that case in Birmingham. So Wednesday, October 15th at 7 p.m., an Auburn exhibition against Oklahoma State. Your first look at the 25 to 26 Tigers, first look at Auburn in Nike. And I would expect another exhibition potentially to be announced, a home exhibition for that series. That non-conference schedule is nearly finalized, I'm guessing. And we're going to see some news on that in the coming weeks, in the coming months. We'll also see the SEC schedule dropped, when Auburn will play. We've obviously talked about the opponents that Auburn will play. But again, a lot of those details to be worked out in the coming months. It's the offseason. So again, thanks for tuning in to today's edition of the Barn Hoops podcast. Make sure you keep it locked in here on the Barn Hoops podcast network. Subscribe, like on whatever podcast platform, as well as YouTube. Top Button Podcast with Kyle Rush, a.k.a. Charlie 5, as well as Village Vice with Zach Blackerby and Brad Law. They are giving you great coverage of this offseason for football, getting you ready for the season opener against Baylor on August 20 or August 30th, whatever day it is. It's right around the corner, and we are so excited for it. We're also excited for Auburn basketball. We'll continue to bring you the offseason content as the summer months move along. So again, thanks for tuning in to today's edition of the Barn Hoops podcast right here on the Barn Podcast Network.